Yeah, I don't know. It's crazy. We'll get started in a little bit. I just grab some water. Okay, we're gonna get started. We got a smaller group today, but we'll strong in number. So welcome. Thanks for coming to the .NET user group. We're going to be talking a little bit about Aspire. It's no longer .NET Aspire because apparently the PM does not want it to be a .NET product. It's a developer tooling. But we'll talk about Aspire today and doing full stack development and just some of the things that I've learned trying to use it. And now that AI is gone because it costs too much money, we're going to go back to real coding. No more AI talking. I promise you. No, we'll talk more about it later. But yeah, so we'll first get into a couple announcements. So this next month we have actually a lot of different events. On June 11th, Grant Erickson, the CEO here at IntelliTech, he's actually going to have an NPR segment on AI. Should be interesting. But June 17th is the next big event. That's going to be the Microsoft Build local host, and that's going to be here in the office. That's 3 to 6 p.m. Kevin, front row, is grinning because this is his event. So obviously Build is just happening. And so we're going to have kind of a first look at some of the content and just some review, some of the new stuff that came out. So we're going to talk about things like Foundry, other things. I haven't heard any other topics, but Foundry will be one of them. On June 23rd, there's going to be a building Copilot Studio agents. I'm going to actually be doing for IntelliTech, doing a webinar about some of the stuff I've been doing with Copilot Studio lately. So if you're interested in like the automation side of the world, it's kind of interesting. We're going to be doing a statement of work automation, so connecting Power Automate flows into Copilot Studio. And then our beautiful .NET user group will happen the 7th at 5 p.m. and that'll just be here at IntelliTech as always. But so what we're going to talk about is I do want to hear people's opinions and what they've been doing with Aspire, because I think Aspire is awesome. And if you've watched the series Aspirify Everything, it's basically the Aspire team getting on, I think it's every Friday, and they just basically go through old apps and say, how do we add Aspire to this? Because Aspire is just the new way C# and Microsoft wants you to orchestrate your application. So you're always going to be very familiar with this look moving forward. Having your resources in a table with traces and structured logs and all these things, but we'll get into what that is in a second. So we'll talk about what is Aspire, and we'll talk about why I'm doing this and why I've really liked Aspire, because it's a full stack application simplified, and then we'll talk about some of the specific ones that there's some interesting and niceties that Aspire gives you. So that's like things like EF migrations, things like OpenAI integrations. Specifically Azure OpenAI. Browser telemetry is a new one. And then we'll talk very briefly at the end about deployments and how to do that with Aspire. We want to have another talk about getting apps from end to end to be deployed, because I think that's a whole different realm of coding, especially if you haven't done it before. But we're going to touch on that briefly today. So first, we're going to go back to this page. What is Aspire? So I think if people have heard of it, then they know what's going on here. But if you haven't, then this dashboard is now what a modern application looks like. And we can look at another one that maybe has a couple more things, and they're stopped resources, but they're a migration service, a card text scraper, a card importer, an API. These now modern applications are distributed almost always, right? People don't describe the applications as distributed, but eventually it gets to that point, right? You have initially just a front end, and then a back end, and then an API, and then a database that the API is talking to. And then, oh, well, maybe I need to talk to my Azure integration over here, whether I'm doing something with AI or I'm just doing something with Azure storage, and I just want to send things off to the corner. So people don't think about their applications as distributed, but pretty much all of them are nowadays, just the way that cloud works. So Aspire is really nice to do this. So I'm going to dive into a really simple project. We're just going to go based just on some of the templates that exist within Aspire. So this is the Blazor version. Let's close the other tabs. So we have a normal program CS here. So this is what you would typically see with a C# application, right? You have this web application builder, you get your services, and then at the bottom you get your app.run, right? So initially, what would be going on is you just start and you have a console that would be running this process. You'd actually have an exe running this process. But okay, that's fine. I'm fine running one console. Okay, then you get to having an API. Okay, so this whole program, what it's doing is just giving me weather information, right? So I have, this is literally just from the template, from the C# template. So I have an API endpoint that says, get me my weather forecast. This is a ping that says, just check the API. This one just returns a random forecast, right? So, okay, to now run this application without Aspire, I would go and open 2 different terminal windows and then say .NET Run and then .NET Run, right? So now I have 2 console windows, not too bad, right? But then you start getting into more complex apps. Maybe you have an Azure Function app that runs in the background, processing information. So, okay, now you tell your team, oh, well, now you have to go start a third process over here, and you only really need to do that when you're doing this, right? So now you have 3 console apps. But what Aspire allows you to do is this fancy project, this magic project called App Host. And it really is just a codified way of saying, I have an API project that is my API service. I have a web front end that connects to my API backend. That simple, right? This app, this is the Blazor Aspire plus API. There is nothing special about this. All the App Host is doing is just codifying these 2 projects. So when I go and run them, let's exit out of Copilot. Let's go to the Blazor one. Aspire run, one simple command, one terminal, starts building my app host. It's going to spin up the same dashboard we saw earlier. And that dashboard gives you the lay of the land, basically. It has your logging, it has your traces, it has metrics, and then the nicest one is the projects overview. So in this application, it's really simple, right? We'll go down here, and I'll actually pull this out. See if I can't see. Is that okay for everyone? I might zoom out a little bit. Okay. So these resources are now displayed in a nice way. So I have an API service and a web front end. I can look at logs that occur. So we hit my API, a couple things, so I get some logs, the counter, whatever. This is just the standard thing, right? All this information. Let's go back to the Aspire resources. We can now look at the structured logs. We can now see that the web front end is receiving HTTP responses. You go to the traces. You could even go to, oh, I really want to look at my database calls, right? There's no database in this case, but I want to look at my HTTP calls. You click into this. You can actually see it correlates to both sides, right? Not only do I have my web front end logs and my API service logs in the same place, they also correlate to each other. So the call on the front end actually makes it all the way to the back end. right? You start getting really, really cool information from these structured traces and logs. Just a show of hands, how many people have used Aspire? I imagine the people up front have touched it a little bit. Okay, so I will go over the basics just so everyone has information. But so going back to that, we're going to look at this term. I want to, let's see. Give me my terminal back, please. So one command, right? No multiple consoles, no nothing like that. And you get a full stack application really, really simply. So this is the first step. So, and we're going to talk a lot about templates today. We also have a plan to talk about .NET templates, but with Aspire, because you're setting up all these different patterns multiple times, I, for one, and other people have done the same thing, we've created templates to basically just say, oh, every time I want an Angular app with API auth and in a database, do this way. So, you know, I have templates, Kevin has templates, and we'll dive into a little bit of some of the different examples of Aspire being used in these different standpoints. So like here you can see I have an MCP template that uses Aspire because the logging that goes through is really nice for MCPs because an MCP is basically making a structured tool call to an AI. So you want telemetry at each point of not only the user sends this query in, then the AI determines that this is the tool it wants, and then it calls this tool, and the tool then talks to the database. So then you correlate all the way through that with Aspire. Here I'm using Angular. That is my front-end language that I know the most. So anytime I want a C# app with an Angular front-end to create whatever web app I want, it does this, right? I just set it up, and we'll talk about that one in a second. And same with the EF one. But Avalonia or like Expo or React Native one, like all these different styles of full stack application are now really, really simple with Aspire. And Kevin has a couple other things that are really cool in his that we talked about a little bit today. Things like, what are the service defaults that are configured? What are you opting into with Aspire? Because Aspire basically takes iConfiguration from C# and says, do that for everything. So Aspire basically goes to C# and says, turn on all the really, really cool language features that you have that nobody knows how to use. So things like service discovery, things like built-in HTTP resiliency and retries, right? So if we look at the service defaults, so when I build, and it's coming from a different project. So when you build an Aspire app with all these templates, they generally come with this service default in a different project. You could also have this under your same main project if you only have one. But what service defaults is doing is building, and I'll zoom in, is it's basically taking all of your different projects and turning on really nice patterns that you fall into success to, right? So instead of having to remember or know to configure OpenTelemetry, Aspire does it for you automatically. To know what service discovery and how to use it, Aspire does that automatically for you. So when you go with things, and service discovery is one that to connect to an HTTP client, you can just do a nice name instead of a full localhost port, right? Nobody wants to have to remember what ports they've put their applications on. Aspire now handles that all for you, just out of the box, right? So other ones that I generally turn on in my projects that I do, things like the Azure Monitor. So if you want to build your project, you add the Azure Monitor exporter if you're going to push to Azure, obviously. And that's here. And this code literally just comes out of the box from the repos. It's all built in. It's really nice to have OpenTelemetry and logging by default. And we're going to get into some of the new things about Aspire, but this is where kind of Aspire's main wins are, is they help your apps to become better by default and then also easier to manage over time. And just a side note here, all of Aspire is kind of built on the idea of Docker and containers. So if you want Podman, you can go the Podman route, but Aspire unfortunately does not support other providers. So yet. But so if you're in Kubernetes, you have to do extra setup yourself. But you know, you chose Kubernetes, so you deserve that. And if there's any ever questions or I need to slow down, or if you want to talk about specific things more, please raise your hands. But we're going to move right along. So we have this Blazor project, and this is kind of the out of the box, really simple. You have a web front end in C# and a back end and API, and it's very similar to the Angular app that we're going to talk about next. But some of the nice things is this is a JavaScript app. So you know, how often do you have a JavaScript framework actually the one building in front of your C# API, right? Who likes writing Node backends? Instead, they want to have the niceties of Vue or Angular or whatever from the front end, but then keep TypeScript away from the real code that lives in the back end. So that's what Aspire, the JavaScript apps, allows us to do. And I'll view the terminal again. And we're just gonna pop over to the, I think it's here. This one is different. I did not layer them the same way. So again, I'm not doing any of the needful of like, oh, I need to make sure I do npmi. For a JavaScript app to generally run it, you have to first install all the dependencies, and then you have to run it in a separate process, and then there's the C# API, and then you have to hard code or have an environment variable, set up your target ports. But with setting it up in Aspire, specifically the way I've set it up, none of that, all of those concerns just go away. You just get an Angular app that can call your C# backend, and it's really nice. So we'll do the same thing. So here we have our front end, and you can see the front end install actually finished already, and I didn't quite get there in time. I'll zoom out a bunch, and then I'll zoom back in a sec. So we'll look at this console log. But if you can see, there's a process underneath it that was connected to the front end that actually ran my npmi. Right, so out of the box, they do npmi. You can also set it to do a clean install, or you can have it to do, give it other arguments. You can customize as you want, but you just get an npmi out of the box connected to your front end process installer. So the front end installer is just underneath because it's a JavaScript app. So now, and before we get further, I want to look at this really quick. And it's really bad when it's small. Let's see if I can't get a little nicer. So what Aspire is built on is the idea of environment variables. So service discovery and other things are built just basically on environment variables everywhere. So my front end knows about my API because I've specified an environment variable here. So, standard things of like, oh, I have an HTTP and an HTTPS. I also have a node environment. But here in my Aspire host, I can actually manage all of these environments and know what's going on. And, oh, I have a misconfiguration. Okay, well, this is why. I'm passing the wrong environment variable, or I'm not specifying the right endpoint for my API, or all these other ones kind of come out of the box because they're going after a specific telemetry exporter. But then on the front end, or on the back end, sorry, these are the ASP.NET Core ones, right? This is pretty standard for you to see the environments and the URLs and the .NET launch profile. Like these things, just they're normal environment variables coming out of the box, but they can be easily managed here. So then we can look here. This is my Angular app, and I like green, so I changed it to be green when I first spin it up. But here I'm getting live data from a C# API, and it's connected and all the things. And we can verify that thing was actually called to the API with a structured log because, or a trace maybe. Yeah, so I called the get API weather forecast. And you notice I didn't get a structured log or a structured trace from my front end. So that's why they introduced the next one we'll talk about. But does that make sense, right? So JavaScript apps connect with API environment variables and all the things. Sound good for everyone? So this is a common problem, a common setup. You have a JavaScript app, and you want it to connect to a C# API in the back end with an app host. So they've introduced kind of a new thing with browser logs. So you get an error or a case on the back end. Great, the logs just come because it's connected through Azure Monitor. But in a browser, it's a little harder. You then have to go to your console logs. You have to Alt-Tab to make sure you're in the right one. And if you don't have your console open, then you lose it. So Aspire, and one of the new features that we'll talk about, actually allows you to harvest those browser logs. So it looks super nice here where you just turn it on. I'm just not with browser logs. Currently, it is under a warning because it's pre-release. That should be removed soon. They update faster than any team. And if you do go to Aspire, just know it's annoying as anything to have a banner tell you to update every time you launch the stupid app. But it keeps you on your toes for sure. Yeah, exactly. Correct. So the question was, we were just looking at the environment variables. I don't have to configure all those environment variables in their name. Exactly. Yeah. So with this reference here, like you just pointed out, you get all of the things plumbed in using service discovery and using iConfiguration standard format, right? So that's why it's API services underscore, right? Because that's my name. So at the top here, I've given my API the name of API, right? And we'll talk a little bit later about some of the other templates, but generally I do constants, so I can name them, so I can reference them later, because then you can use things like service discovery and say, hey, give me the iClient or the iHTTP client that is associated with my service, or my front end. Get my environment variable that I've put in here. Web API underscore services, because that's what service discovery expects, right? Exactly, yes. And a lot of this stuff on this app host, these magic strings, be wary of these magic strings. These can bite you. So I generally go to constants in my projects. If we look at like the Angular one, I don't know if I have it here. Maybe I don't have it here. When we get to my real projects of like what's deployed, let's see. Let's do this. I actually have constants projects names because I get bit because the way you configure things like Azure Blob Storage or OpenAI, you actually, instead of doing a connection string like you would previously do, I don't want to get too far into it before I reveal the magic, but you actually use named clients to say, hey, I'm going to add Azure Storage here, and then I go to my program CS that wires up my Azure Blob Storage. If I can find blob. Add blob service client, and the name is a connection name, not a connection string anymore. So previously you would do like builder configuration, throw in my default connection string for my Azure Blob, but now it's a named connection that Aspire uses. So this same thing, this blob container, is just a very simple project name, static class with a public const string, just so I don't have to remember the magic strings. But that's where Aspire is kind of taking you, is you now use named connections instead of passing around connection strings, if that makes sense. But back to the template, we'll talk a little bit about that later. But just to show off the browser logs that it does work. Oh, and this is double layered. Oh. The same thing, we'll build the app host. So this one's gonna look a little different because the way this whole thing hooks up is actually a Chromium process. So the front end browser logs, right, and a front end installer. If I pop this open, it actually opens a browser for me. And then an extra thing here, I can get an exception from the back end, and it blew up. We'll go back to VS Code, and we can look. So the API, there's an error. We'll look at the traces, and here, we'll zoom in on this. So previously, I would only get the error from the back end, but now I have a correlated log from the front end of the console.error. So the console error happening in my Angular app now correlates to my API endpoint, more similar to how Blazor would do it, but because it's a JavaScript app, it doesn't obviously have all the same things a C# app. But now you can do it with this browser load. So it's super simple to set up. It is in preview right now, but you can get these traces. So the trace log, now you have the API, but it originates from the aspire.web.browser, and that trace happens at around 48 milliseconds. Mm-hmm. I believe so, yeah. The with browser logs occurs at the iResource builder level, so you can change to anything and then have this Chromium browser start up for anything. So I haven't done WebAssembly because I don't hate myself. But if you want to, feel free, dude. Fair question, though. Yes, I imagine it would work with WebAssembly because underneath the covers, it is JavaScript being executed. Great question. Anything else on that? We'll keep chugging on forward with Aspire. And yeah, I updated it last night, and it still bugs me. With the new version of Aspire is available. You're on 13.4.4. Shut up. But I love Aspire, so I won't be too mean. And Kevin talks to their PM on a regular basis, so I don't want to be mean to them. Okay. So just moving forward, a couple of the other patterns that that Aspire really kind of pushes you towards is having, once you have the ability to really nicely add projects, at least for me, I find that I just explode. I'm like, oh, it would be kind of nice to have this backend service over here, just be on its own little thing. And you really quickly get to like, oh, well, instead of having my migrations be a on startup thing, it's actually kind of nice to be able to run them concurrently and just be able to stop my process, run migrations. Oh, it didn't work, and I have structured logs for it and the database. So this is the way I've done it. So we're going to talk a little bit about background services and workers because it's really easy to kick them off now with Aspire because there's a play and a pause button. I am not a cool coder. I don't always do Aspire run in the terminal. I like pressing the big top button in Visual Studio. That's just how I go because pressing play and pressing pause feel fun. So having this same, sometimes if it plays, it feels good. So we're going to look into the EF core. See, I don't like F5. I like pressing the button. That is point taken, my good sir. Point taken. I like pressing the button with my mouse. Is there an F5? Yeah. I can open the keyboard on Windows and then press F5. Okay, so we're going to look at this code a little bit before we dive too much into it. But this is a simple EF core, and this is part of my templates. Plugged to my templates. They're published out on NuGet, so just done a new install. So app host here. And some of the really nice things is actually where you get in with databases because beyond just saying, oh, I want to add the Postgres image, there's also ones that are specific to cloud providers. So things like .add Azure Postgres Flexible Server. So when you do AZD up or you do Aspire publish, it actually tries, keyword tries to provision those things in the right way based on the cloud provider. So I had a project that I built that was, part of it was I was building this game for me and my brother. But the other part was like, I'm interested, can I, no Terraform, no managing the GUI, and no managing the infrastructure myself, can the app host actually do this and get a real application published and work? It mostly did. It fell over on its face with a custom domain. That's okay. That's okay. I did the custom domain with the Azure GUI myself, but everything else, the way the database was modeled, and that was the one I showed earlier, where here in the app host, I actually specify what kind of configuration I have. So this Azure SKU, it's in code. Now you can see what my database is based on my code. And this is an Azure SQL Server with this infrastructure, right? So, and this nice if statement, if is publish mode, that's really nice because locally, I don't want Azure SQL to spin up. I don't want to have to connect to a Azure resource group and say, this is my SQL server, now go use it. Locally, I just use the simple SQL server just so I can have the same EF core provider. But you could publish anything there. You could say .add SQLite or whatever you want, right? Correct. Yes, you could do the Azure container, but this was before that. So yes, you could do that now. So you could have a single one, and then it would, under the covers, actually do it if check of, do I use the container or do I use the connected Azure one? And you can see my comment of a couple things of like, my bill over usage, this database was pennies on the dollar, but it would auto pause. And so every time I went to the application, it would have a cold start. And so then my database would be like, I don't want to talk to this database. And then I have to refresh it and then it eventually work. I was like, I don't want to do that. So don't use the free limit. Just make sure you're using the $5 a month one. Don't cost me money. And then a couple other things that I'll call out while we're here is the migrations project, the wait for completion versus wait for. So in your application app host, you're actually defining basically the setup steps. So Aspire, if previously you had to make sure, you want your database running before your API and you want your front end running after your API, right? So, you kind of have a logical sequence of things. You first start the database and then the API connects to the database and then the front end connects to the API. Or maybe you need to have, before the front end connects, you need to have a bunch of processes spin up and spin down. Just note that there are different ways to wait for things. There's wait for, which is just literally the first time that health check goes, it's going to pop. Things like migration services that are a worker service that will actually have a start and end point. You can also do wait for completion or things like with explicit start. And these two chain together say, you can't start me until this one completes, or this API service, wait for completion, right? And then it just runs up and starts. So just a couple of different lifecycle hooks. So just like anything else, there's lots of different ways to manage your application, but Aspire makes it codified, which is really nice. So then the next developer that comes onto your team doesn't have to know the tribal knowledge of, oh, well, you got to make sure you wait 7.5 minutes for the database to go because there's actually services that need to kick off and do other things. No, just codify it and do it right. So back to my EF core example, we have a database and we have this migration service. I've also added dbgate just to look at what's going on, and dbgate is just a community project to Aspire, community plugin. What is it called? Community package. Say it again. Yeah, no, they have a specific term for the integrations. I think it's custom integrations or community integrations. But going from the app host to actually migration service, this migration service is just a .NET worker. So if you literally do .NET new worker with that template, you'll get the same thing that this migration service is. So again, we see that specific keyword, the add service defaults, which is the beauty of now use all the things Aspire wants you to do with resiliency and HTTP checks, whatever. And now there is a little bit of difference here with the way you configure your databases. So no longer is it builder.services.addDBcontext, where then you configure your database. Each of the Aspire database integrations have their own kind of way to do them. And we're going to get into the Aspire docs in just one second. But do it that way. There's other ways to do it as well. You can also do enrich DB context to make sure it still has the Aspire things, like it wants to do pooling for its DB contexts. It wants to do retries. But this one just configures it out of the box and does a lot of the things for you. So unless you have a specific need or you want to configure your warnings differently, you might need to do it a little differently. But Yeah, just make sure you're using the right package, because if you don't use the Aspire package, it won't use this named connection like before. So connection name, not connection string. Right? If you try to use the connection string and then your connection string is DB, not going to work probably, unless you can randomly connect to a database on DB. Some of the other things of like, oh, I want to have seeding and I want to look at this assembly name. I'll just save it so then C# here stops and yelling at me. So here I'm using the seeding. So if you're in this context, add an initial to do, right? Just seed my database when you migrate. So this is as simple as it gets, right? But now it's in its own process as opposed to on app start, so you can get a different life cycle for it. So we're going to look at what that looks like. Aspire run. And Aspire's list of integrations, while we're building this, I figure, I actually looked at the time and I'm actually kind of running out of time. Aspire's integration list is only growing. Basically, anyone that's doing anything at Microsoft now is basically here. Every team, right? All the Aspire hosting and all the Azure stuff and all the database stuff. You could just scroll down this. You have pretty much anything you want, right? And they push out updates like nobody's business. But so if you're using things, and if you want, you can do Aspire in Go and Java if you want for some reason, but whatever. But just know that their list of things and even the community toolkit are really cool. There is not a thing that I've found that is not cool with Aspire. I'm just gonna scroll this while we're loading, just to show you how many different packages and integrations there are that you can do with Aspire. Azure Functions have a built-in integration, so you can kick off your Azure Functions in a nice way. Storage, Azure Storage, Azure Blobs, Azure queues, all of the Azure stuff. Even AWS has built-in Aspire connections. Okay, the DBGate one is cool, so we'll look at that really quick. So this one, we're getting to a little more complex of an app, right? We have, not only do we have an API service, but we also have a database, right? So this is our DB provider here is Postgres. Then we have our actual database. So if you have a database server with multiple databases, you could have that look, right? You'd have multiple underneath it. So you have to have your database server, then you can have your databases underneath it. DBGate references Postgres, so that's here as well. And then you have this migration service, and you can see that it's finished. And that's why all the other things are not running, because they were waited for completion. So if we look at this migration service logs, it actually failed. It looked like it needed to retry, which it automatically does. And I'm not actually sure why it failed. Maybe it was, do I need to have a wait for the database? I thought I did. But regardless, you know, as standard by EF, it first looks and says, do I have a table? And then says, if not, let's run this thing, create table. And then, like we said before, my seed async, the select exists from one. It says, oh, you don't have one? Let's insert into to-dos. So now, and I think I just closed out of the thing that I wanted to go click. So we'll open it back up. So if you look first at the API service, and I think this has a Swagger, yes. So we now have a service that's been migrated and seeded by an external process that we can monitor and run again and check if, you know, asymptotically it still succeeds. But, you know, at the end of the day, it's just a simple to-do. The actual to-do that was created by seeding. Yay, I have a to-do app. Beautiful. I know, that one took me all day. Let's just, I don't know where my terminal goes after I bring it down too much. We'll keep on plugging along, and I might have to cut myself short on some of the other ones, because the next one we'll talk about is, maybe I did get through them all. Yeah, okay. So from the list of integrations, some of the other really cool ones are the way that OpenAI actually integrates with Aspire. OpenAI, the Azure OpenAI specifically, when you connect a iChat client, which is kind of the new abstraction that Microsoft wants everyone to use if they're going to talk to an LLM, you can get the same sort of tracing that you get from a service or from a from the web browser logs, right? You get the same idea, but you get little sparkles on it. We're gonna start that, but you get extra things around how your iChat client is behaving. If you give it extra tools, you get the reasoning behind why it called those tools. If you give it functions, you get the reasoning why it called those functions. And an iChat client has you can give it methods, and whether you're using semantic kernel or the new agent framework, the Aspire team has really made iChat clients a first-party citizen of Aspire in the logs and telemetry land. So if we actually look back just really quick before we even get any logs, Aspire run, you can actually look at in the logging, there's already a section for AI services. So that filtering already is kind of built into Aspire. So here within the traces and the filter types, generative AI or cloud, they've kind of pre-canned these list of types because your traces are going to have a specific thing. So like most API interactions are going to be at the HP level, or maybe you're talking to a database, or maybe you're using a Kafka queue, maybe you're RPCing between things. But these last two, generative AI or cloud, and then they kind of have a catch-all bucket of other, are really nice because those don't come from your normal console logs, right? Normally, to get generative AI or cloud logs within an application, you would have to wire that up to your own process and then log them out using structured logs. But now you get just traces directly from those services. So as opposed to a structured log where you specify, a console.log with level of information or whatever, right? So I still get my EF ones, right? This is execute a DB command, but then I can also look at my DB and say, oh, I actually got to connect one. So I would have a log from that from the API, but I would also have that from the database itself. So not just the API's version of the world, but also the database's version of the world. Any questions on that? Does that all make sense? Yeah. We will look at this OpenAI one. It failed on me earlier today after it succeeded, and I don't know if that was because of overriding, because it's trying to deploy things to Foundry, but let's see. But it is as simple as go ahead and add these chat clients. So just like everything else, it now just becomes a thing in your app host where I say, oh, I have this chat, a GPT-4o mini. This is deployed out to a Foundry instance. And then my API service, my API service uses this. So I just inject it, and it handles all of the magic and dependency injection that would then lead to over my program. So I've named it chat. In this case, I'm not using the project names, but if you look then at the API service, and I configure everything, it's again using that chat. So because it's named both ways, I get to then use DI of an iChat client to say, and this is my previous API was a weather service, but now I want AI to really talk about the weather and give me great AI information about the weather. So it just returns an iChat message here and returns a response text of an empty summary or return the weather summary. So pretty simple, but you get the same connections all the way through. And this one is here just with an endpoint. But yeah, the OpenAI integration is very simple. So we can move to that. But this is what Aspire allows you to do. Now, all the integrations you have look really simple to configure. Obviously, when you have complex things to set up, there are ways to configure different, just like any program CS where there's the defaults that Microsoft kind of has, and then to override them, you give them, a func and give it the configuration options. I think in this case, it lives at this level. Maybe it's above. Yeah, so you get to specify an extra iResource builder for the thing, or you can even specify this as existing, or run as existing, or publish it as a connection string, and really configure things in the app host. So when you get a real application, the app host file starts to look really complicated, and it looks really long. But at the end of the day, a complicated app is going to have a complicated surface of its application, right? So if even when you get beyond just, oh, I have an API database and one other integration, Aspire still really thrives in that land. And why is it telling me? Stop being mean. I don't know. It's being mean to me. Yes. Yes. So that is a great point. There's been other ones that I've had secrets for, and the way Aspire, again, it's just an environment variable, or they save it off to user secrets. But we can pull this off to my non-recorded screen and see which one I can pull that has some good things. Okay, this one doesn't really matter. Okay. So this is literally my app host manage user secrets. So this is only my local Postgres and SQL Server database password. So they're not actually, if you guys want to go steal my local data about a Star Wars game, be my guest. You don't have access to my computer, so weird. Okay, whatever. But if you want to, go for it. But this is the app host user secrets. So they've set up parameters and all these things. So if I run this one, see, I like clicking the run button at the top. That's a nice button at the top. We can actually look at these parameters because these are considered secret parameters, so we won't be able to inspect them. But you can add new parameters, and they'll be put in the same place here under Aspire. So, yep, we got this parameters tag, and you can see this one. This is the little banner that will make you hate yourself. No. Yeah. Yes, exactly. So this one specifically has a bunch of things. It has a migration service that's running. It has a card importer, and these ones are interesting because they're just C# worker services that just do other things. And this one I think is even just a console app. So I specify apps, or I specify arguments to run different processes, and I can literally just start a console app from here. And this is explicit start, so I'm not going to start it, or it won't start automatically, but kind of the exact same thing. But the thing I wanted to show you was the parameters, right? So there's no parameters in this app because they're hidden. But if I wanted to add another parameter and just say, oh, well, I don't really know what the user wants for their, whether that's their, you need to bring an API key for this. That is still done at the app host level. And I think it's, oh, what is it? I got to look it up. Thank you. And you can specify it as secret. So then when the user inputs a value, and we'll actually look at this. So we'll do, get out of here. Let's do username. And let's go, so by default, it's not secret. So it'll be saved for my thing. But then this parameter can be pushed to anything. So whether that's the API service or maybe the front end, you get some niceties. And the way Aspire really wants you to do front end and back end is beefy. Thanks, Kevin, for the wonderful acronym. For a back end for front end, so when you actually deploy it, it's not two different endpoints, but you can also do it. Then the container app of the front end actually has to just be able to stand on its own. So like I was saying, we just added this parameter. There is now, so maybe you don't have things that you can codify or put in your app settings development because it's a secret API key. But for your team, you can say, hey, when you run my app, you're actually going to have a lot of things that I need to give you, but it's not just, you're not going to get a runtime exception. It's just saying, hey, give me the parameters I need to actually be able to run. And if the parameter was actually required by some of the apps, let's actually go down that route. Let's add it to, I think it's with reference. What did I name it? Thank you. Very complicated. So with reference, and maybe it's not with reference. Let's see. With environment, yeah. And I need to name the environment. Yep. There you go. So now I actually want to pass this parameter because I want to use it. I don't want to just have it sit out there. The app won't actually start because it's waiting for its unresolved things, right? And it tells us exactly that, right? So I have a bunch of parameters because I have secret API keys, or maybe I want to hook up, one other database that I'm not going to add to my app host. And you can specify things as existing as opposed to having it scaffold and just say, hey, you don't need to worry about this, but just so there's something over here that's then could be added to my pretty little graph and my structured logs and all the other things that Aspire gives. You can get this kind of thing. You're waiting for the value, and Aspire really is about making the developer experience just so much better, right? When you have 7 different things to worry about, it's very nice to have it tell you and be codified that, hey, things aren't right, or you're waiting for this thing, or whatever it is. So now I need to set the value, and you can enter it here, and I can also save it to user secrets. Otherwise, I just do it on App Start, whatever it is. So parameters are a really nice way for Aspire to get you kind of more information. But that is a great, kind of lost where I was going. Yes, okay, that's where we got off on this tangent. Yes, correct. So for cloud things where, hey, I already have a cloud deployed thing, whether that's AWS or Azure, you can also specify those sorts of things, whether that's a subscription and then a resource group, and then you just say, now use all the things in my resource group. You can do that with Azure, and things like Foundry instances can be done that way. I think there's it's an Azure resource, where if you give it a subscription ID, a location, and then a resource group, it kind of scaffolds everything else, right? And then it uses the managed identity that's there, or it uses AZD login to just get you all the things that you need. But thank you, great question, Stokes, and great call out. The user secrets in your deployments are really important, and where a lot of the kind of magic happens. And when you deploy things based on Aspire, it's just using the deploy things. The Aspire dashboards we looked at before, these are actually from deployed sites on Azure. Azure's first class integration for things like container apps. I've deployed the app we saw earlier, the Star Wars one, as a container app. So that's not the right one. Gotta go here. So this dashboard actually is looking at my specific container app. So see this nice little link? And there is one. It just takes kind of a second to do. But this is the same one we looked at earlier. This is one of these ones. So it's named after the container apps environment. But you can see I've configured on Azure a custom domain URL, and now there's extra things that passed in. So, looking at my the migrations, and nothing will be passed in because it's a custom domain. But for the details, it actually has that set up as one of the things and URLs and addresses because it's configured from Azure. It's really nice to just flow from one to another. Same with these are container apps endpoints that are just function apps in the background, or a Docker image holding a .NET console app, because that's all the card text scraper is. The importer is a function app. Tried some different things. The migration service is a worker service. I've stopped it because I don't need a migration right now. And seemingly migration workers are not the best way to do it in Azure, because they cost a lot of money to just sit there waiting to be used. It's kind of annoying. So you can do a console app. With migrations, it's really easy, because all you need is access to the database, and any iResource in Aspire can get access to your database connection string. So I've got on a couple tangents, but is there any final questions or just thoughts about Aspire that people have, or things they're confused on? %, yes. So the question was, for deployments, how do you incorporate Terraform or other real ways to get an application to production? So this was just to show that you could do it. I don't recommend it for real applications, but you can do it. But yes, so Terraform, so you don't have to do anything with the Aspire infrastructure to deploy it. Aspire, at the end of the day, is just a project running, right? You can use the same CI/CD kind of practices and take your C# project, go build and publish, then say, now I'm going to take this and be terraformed, and all the things. No, a lot of the things about Aspire is that it's just code, right? Because at the end of the day, it's code. So we have a couple of the applications that are Terraform based that use Aspire to still connect all the different pieces. And Kevin could talk to that a little bit more, but Aspire is just turning on switches, if that makes sense. So that the biggest thing that the deployed application gets is actually nothing about the app host. It's that first line in the program CS. That is, go to the API one. The ad service defaults. That's the biggest thing, because those are still turned on in the production environment, right? Regardless of whatever happens in the app hosts and other things, this builder.add service defaults still applies all of these things to the configured and published API. No. So this is just code. This service. Correct. Yeah. None of this is Aspire. It's just this is part of Aspire's kind of. They put you in this world of use all these things, but that the app host is kind of the real Aspire, I guess. If you're making the distinction between, oh, I get service defaults because I'm using Aspire versus I'm using Aspire for a deployed application. Yeah, so the comment was, for configured applications that are published, the difference with not using Aspire is you have to still do that management, like the URLs being the biggest one, right? If you have an API talking to a database, talking to a front end, talking to an Azure Function app, talking to all these things, you need to configure those connections in the deployed environment, but that's not any different than previously, right? Yeah, in the series that Microsoft does of Aspire for everything, they have deployed infrastructure already. So their app is generally just saying, attach this thing as existing, attach this thing as existing, and then their deployed environment already works. But then the local environment is really nice to work with. It's generally the kind of direction they go, right? If you're not building from scratch, and then it's especially if you're building like a real application from scratch, you still need to do all those things, right? You still set up the dev, test, and prod environments, and the idea, and it's on the roadmap to add Terraform as a provider for Aspire, to then be able to connect both and have them kind of live in sync. But obviously we're not there yet. Fair comment though. Yeah. And I think that is something we want to talk on further, is because I think deployments is just a whole nother area of C#. So. Well, cool. I don't want to take too much time, so thank you guys so much for listening to me ramble on about Aspire. See you guys next month. Stop the recording, but thank you.